It was a quiet afternoon in a small neighborhood just outside a busy town. The air was warm and gentle, filled with the smell of fresh-cut grass and blooming flowers. The streets were calm, with only the sound of birds and the occasional car passing by. On that peaceful day, an elderly woman named Mildred Johnson stepped out of her small brick house. Holding the leash of her dog, Rex Mildred was 72, with silver hair neatly tied in a bun and soft brown eyes that carried warmth and kindness. She had lived in the same house for more than 40 years. Most of her neighbors knew her well. Some called her Miss Johnson. Others just waved whenever she walked by with Rex. She loved her daily walks. They kept her active and gave her time to think. Rex was a large German shepherd with thick fur and a calm but alert look in his eyes. When Mildred first met him at the animal shelter 2 years earlier, he seemed different from the other dogs. He was quiet, well-behaved, and somehow carried himself with pride. The shelter staff had told her that Rex had once been a working dog, but didn't go into much detail. Mildred didn't need to know everything. All she saw was a loyal companion who needed a home, and she gave him one. Every afternoon around 3 o'clock, Mildred and Rex walked their usual route. They went down Maple Street, past the small convenience store, then looped back through the park. Rex always stayed close, matching her slow pace, pausing whenever she needed to rest. People often smiled when they saw them together, an old woman and her strong, gentle dog. That day, Mildred wore her favorite light blue sweater and a wide-brimmed hat to keep the sun off her face. She carried a small bag with dog treats, a bottle of water, and her old flip phone. As she walked, she hummed an old gospel tune under her breath. Life wasn't perfect, but she had learned to find peace in small things. The warmth of the sun, the sound of the breeze, and the loyal steps of Rex beside her. When they reached the corner near the convenience store, Rex paused for a moment. His ears twitched and he gave a low, cautious bark. Mildred smiled and patted his head. "It's all right, boy. Just the wind," she said softly. She didn't notice the pickup truck slowing down on the other side of the road. Inside the truck were 3 young men. They had been driving around aimlessly, laughing loudly and tossing an empty can out the window. The truck had music blaring from its speakers, and the sound echoed down the quiet street. As they came closer, one of them pointed toward Mildred and said something that made the others laugh harder. Mildred didn't hear what they said at first. She was focused on crossing the street safely, holding Rex's leash tight. But then the laughter grew louder, and one of the men shouted something nasty. She froze for a second, unsure if she had heard it right. Rex's head turned sharply, his body stiffening. The truck slowed even more. One of the men leaned halfway out the window, calling out more words that made her heart tighten. His tone wasn't playful, it was mean, cruel. Mildred tried to keep walking, hoping they would drive away. She didn't want trouble. She had lived long enough to know that some people carried hate in their hearts, and it was best not to feed it. But instead of leaving, the truck pulled over near the curb. The men laughed again, one of them throwing an empty cup out the window. The drink splashed near Mildred's shoes. She stopped, startled. Rex gave a sharp bark that echoed through the street. "Let's just go, boy," she whispered, tugging gently on the leash. Rex stayed close, his body between her and the truck. His eyes were locked on the men. They got out of the vehicle, still smirking. One of them wore a baseball cap turned backward. Another had a cigarette hanging from his mouth. They looked like the kind of people who wanted attention, who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. Mildred's heart started beating faster. She looked around, but there weren't many people nearby. The convenience store clerk was inside, busy at the counter, and a man across the street was talking on his phone, glancing over but not stepping closer. "Afternoon," Mildred said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "No need for any trouble." One of the men laughed and took a step closer. "We're just talking, lady. What's your dog gonna do, huh?" Rex let out another deep growl, low and steady, his tail stiff. He didn't lunge or bark wildly. He just stood firm, watching every move. There was something in his stance that made the men hesitate for a moment. It wasn't fear, but a kind of silent warning. Mildred wished she could just disappear. She thought about crossing the street or turning back, but they had already blocked her way. She didn't want to call attention to herself, and she certainly didn't want Rex to get hurt. The man in the cap stepped a little closer, his smirk fading as he stared at the dog. "That's a big one." "You think he bites?" he asked, looking at the others with a grin. "Only if you give him a reason," Mildred said softly, her voice calm but firm. Something in the way she said it seemed to surprise him. He paused, then scoffed and turned toward his friends. "Come on, let's go," one of them muttered, sounding uneasy. But before they could move, another shouted something rude, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. He tossed a crumpled piece of paper at her feet and laughed again. Rex's growl deepened. His ears were flat, his muscles tight. Mildred could feel the tension in the leash, but she held it firmly. "It's okay, Rex," she whispered, though her voice trembled slightly. At that moment, a man walking his bike came around the corner. He noticed what was happening and slowed down, watching carefully. The three men noticed him too. For a brief second, the spell broke. "Let's go, man," the one with the cigarette finally said, rolling his eyes. "This ain't worth it." They turned back toward the truck, still muttering under their breath. The sound of the engine starting broke the tense silence. Mildred didn't move until the truck disappeared down the street. Only then did she let out a long, shaky breath. She looked down at Rex. His body was still tense, but his eyes met hers with concern, not anger. "Good boy," she whispered, kneeling to stroke his fur. "You did just right." The man with the bike came closer and asked if she was all right. She nodded and thanked him. "Some people just don't know any better," she said with a tired smile. He offered to walk her home, but she declined politely. "I'm fine now, thank you. I've got my protector right here." Rex wagged his tail slightly, still keeping watch as they continued their walk. As they turned the corner toward the park, Mildred's heart slowly steadied. She tried not to let the moment ruin her peace. She had lived through enough unkindness in her life to know that bitterness only grew when you let it take root. Still, she couldn't help but feel a deep sadness, not just for herself, but for the world that still allowed such ugliness to exist. Rex seemed to sense her mood. He pressed his body gently against her leg, walking a little closer than usual. Mildred smiled softly and reached down to pat his head. "You're my angel, you know that?" she said. They reached the park where children were playing and families were sitting on benches. The normal sounds of laughter and chatter felt like a comfort. Mildred found her favorite bench under the old oak tree and sat down. She took out a biscuit from her bag and handed it to Rex, who accepted it gently. For a while, she just sat there, watching the world go by. The sunlight danced through the leaves, casting warm patterns on the ground. A breeze brushed her face and she closed her eyes, letting it carry away the fear that had lingered. She thought about how lucky she was to have Rex. He wasn't just a pet, he was family. There was something special about him, something she couldn't quite explain. He always seemed to know when she was in danger or when she needed comfort. That day, as they sat quietly in the park, she had no idea that the moment they had just lived through was only the beginning of something much bigger. She didn't know that her loyal dog carried a past filled with bravery and discipline, a past that would soon change everything. When the sun began to set, she stood up slowly and started the walk back home. The streets were calm again. The same houses, the same trees, but somehow the world felt slightly different, heavier. She tightened her grip on Rex's leash, thankful for his presence. "Come on, boy," she said softly. "Let's get home." Rex trotted beside her, his head high, scanning the street like a quiet guardian. His job, as far as he was concerned, was simple: protect the woman who had given him love. And though Mildred didn't yet understand it, Rex had once been trained for far more than simple walks. Somewhere deep inside him, the instincts of a protector, of a true police dog, were still alive and waiting. That day they returned home safely, but fate was already setting the stage for what was to come. The world would soon see just how powerful the bond between a woman and her dog could be. The next morning, the air was cool and gentle, carrying the smell of dew and fresh bread from the small bakery down the street. Mildred sat by her kitchen window, stirring sugar into her cup of tea. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling golden light across her small garden. Rex lay quietly by the door, his head resting on his paws, his eyes following her every move. She kept thinking about what had happened the day before. It played in her mind again and again. The laughter, the harsh words, the sudden fear. She didn't want to hold on to it, but some memories stayed whether you wanted them or not. She sighed softly and looked at Rex. "You were brave. You know that?" she said with a faint smile. Rex lifted his head, his ears twitching as if he understood every word. "I don't know what I'd do without you." After breakfast, Mildred decided to keep her day normal. That was her way of healing, by carrying on. She swept her porch, watered her plants, and read a few pages from her old mystery novel. By afternoon, she felt calm enough to take Rex for another walk. But this time she chose a different route, one that went through the park first before looping back home. She wanted to avoid the corner near the store, at least for a while. As they walked, a few neighbors greeted her. Mr. Henderson, the mail carrier, stopped his bike and smiled. "Morning, Miss Johnson. Out with your bodyguard again, huh?" Mildred chuckled. "He does keep me safe," she said. "You take care now," he replied, handing her a small envelope. "Got something for you. Looks like a letter from your niece." She thanked him and tucked the letter into her sweater pocket. Rex wagged his tail and sniffed the air, relaxed again after the tension of yesterday. The park was alive with people that day. Children played tag, a few joggers passed by, and an elderly couple fed breadcrumbs to pigeons near the fountain. It was the kind of day that made the world feel kind again. Mildred sat on a bench for a while, letting Rex rest in the shade. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, came running over, pointing at Rex. "Can I pet him?" he asked shyly. Mildred smiled. "If you're gentle, yes." The boy reached out and Rex sat perfectly still, his tail wagging lightly. The boy's mother waved from a few steps away. "Thank you," she called. "He loves dogs." "No problem at all," Mildred said kindly. "Rex loves people too." Moments like that reminded her of why she loved walking outside. Most people were good, kind-hearted, and respectful. The world still had more good than bad. She had to believe that. After a while, she stood up and continued her walk. The streets beyond the park were quieter, lined with oak trees that cast long, cool shadows. Rex walked close by, every now and then stopping to sniff a mailbox or a patch of grass. But as they turned a corner near an empty lot, Mildred's heart gave a small jolt. The same truck from yesterday was parked across the street. It was hard to mistake it. The dull red color, the dented back bumper, and the sticker on the window. The laughter from inside carried across the quiet air. Mildred stopped walking for a second. She didn't want to panic, but her hands began to shake slightly. She considered turning around, but that might draw attention. She told herself to stay calm and act natural. "Come on, Rex," she said softly. "Let's just keep walking." Rex seemed to sense her unease. His ears perked up, his posture tightening. He stayed on her left side, his eyes focused ahead. The men in the truck noticed her. One of them leaned out the window, and even from across the street she could feel the sharpness in his voice. "Hey, it's the lady from yesterday." Mildred didn't look back. She just kept walking, her chin up. Her heart beat faster with every step. The sound of the truck engine starting made her stomach twist. The vehicle rolled slowly down the street, keeping pace with her from the other side. She glanced around for someone, anyone, who might be nearby, but the street was quiet. Most people were inside, hiding from the heat of the afternoon. "Don't look at them," she whispered to herself. "Just keep walking." Rex growled softly, not loud enough to be heard across the street, but enough to let her know he was alert. The truck moved ahead and stopped again, a few houses down. One of the men got out, pretending to check something in the back. The others stayed inside, watching. Mildred's palms felt damp. She knew she needed to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. She crossed the street toward a row of houses, hoping someone might be outside. As she reached the sidewalk, she saw a woman watering her garden. Relief washed through her. She waved politely. The woman smiled and waved back. "Afternoon," she said cheerfully. "Afternoon?" Mildred replied, her voice a little shaky. The truck didn't follow this time. Maybe the presence of another person made them hesitate. Mildred kept walking until she was safely past the block. Only when the truck's sound faded completely did she exhale in relief. Back home, she locked the door and sat on the couch, still trembling slightly. Rex sat beside her, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur slowly. "It's all right now," she whispered. "We're safe." But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Those men weren't just teasing or being rude. There was something darker behind their behavior. And though she didn't want to live in fear, she also couldn't ignore the feeling that this wasn't over. Later that evening, there was a soft knock on her door. She hesitated before answering, but when she looked through the small window, she saw it was the same man who had stopped his bike yesterday, the one who had asked if she was all right. "Good evening," he said when she opened the door a crack. "Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to check in. I saw that truck again earlier. They were driving slow through the neighborhood. Mildred's heart sank. You saw them, he nodded. Yeah, don't mean to worry you, but maybe keep an eye out. Folks like that, they look for people they think can't fight back. Mildred thanked him for his concern. I'll be careful, she said softly. After he left, she sat back down with Rex at her feet. The house felt quiet, too quiet. The ticking of the old wall clock seemed louder than usual. She thought about calling her niece, but she didn't want to worry her. Her niece lived 3 states away, busy with her own family. Besides, Mildred had always been strong. She'd lived alone for years and had faced challenges before. Still, as night fell, she double-checked every window and locked the doors again. Rex lay by the front door, his body stretched out, his eyes half open but always watching. Mildred whispered a small prayer before going to bed. Lord, keep us safe tonight, she said softly. In the middle of the night, Rex stirred. His ears twitched and he lifted his head. There was a faint sound outside, maybe footsteps, maybe just the wind. Mildred was asleep, her breathing steady. Rex stood quietly and walked to the window. Through the thin curtain, he saw shadows moving near the fence. He didn't bark. He just watched, his body motionless but ready. The shadows stayed for a moment, then disappeared into the dark. When morning came, Mildred noticed Rex sitting by the door, unusually alert. She poured him some food, but he didn't eat right away. What's the matter, boy? She asked. He looked at her, then at the window as if trying to tell her something. Mildred frowned and stepped outside for a moment. There were a few footprints near the gate, fresh ones. She felt a chill run down her spine. She went back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it for a moment. Someone was out there last night, she whispered to herself. Rex stood beside her, tail low but steady, waiting for her next move. That afternoon, Mildred called the local community center and told them about what had been happening. They promised to send a patrol car around more often. It gave her a little comfort, but the unease didn't fade completely. Rex stayed close all day, following her from room to room. Whenever a car passed by, he went to the window, watching carefully. Mildred realized something then. Rex wasn't just reacting out of fear. He was trained. His calm focus, his controlled growl, his silence when danger was near. It all pointed to something deeper. Who were you before you came to me? She asked quietly, kneeling beside him. You act like a soldier, not a pet. Rex wagged his tail slightly, but his eyes were sharp, serious. Mildred smiled and rubbed his neck gently. Well, whoever you were, I'm glad you're mine now. That night she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window again. The street was peaceful, glowing under the soft street lights. But in her heart she knew peace was fragile. She didn't know that soon. The men from the truck would return, and that the truth about Rex's past would come to light in a way no one could have expected. For now, though she simply sat in the glow of her small home, her faithful dog by her side, and whispered the same words she always did before bed. Good night. Rex, you're my guardian angel. Rex lay down quietly, his eyes half closed but still alert, waiting for whatever tomorrow might bring. The next few days passed slowly. Mildred tried to return to her routine, but the quiet of her little house now felt different. Every creak in the floor, every passing car made her glance toward the window. Rex, too, seemed more alert than ever. He no longer slept deeply. Instead, he rested lightly as though waiting for something to happen. One afternoon, the sun was shining bright through the lace curtains when the doorbell rang. Mildred peeked out carefully and saw a police officer standing on her porch. She hesitated, then opened the door. Good afternoon, ma'am, the officer said politely. We've been doing our rounds after a few complaints about suspicious behavior in the neighborhood. I just wanted to check that everything's all right here. Mildred smiled faintly. Thank you, officer. I appreciate that. I did see a few people hanging around a few nights ago, but I haven't had trouble since. Rex stood beside her, quiet but watchful. The officer looked down at him with a small grin. That's a fine dog you've got there. He looks well trained. Mildred nodded. He's my best friend. After the officer left, Mildred felt a bit more at ease. It comforted her to know someone was keeping an eye on the neighborhood. That evening, she sat outside on her porch swing with a glass of lemonade, listening to the crickets sing as the sun dipped low. Rex lay at her feet, his tail thumping lightly whenever she spoke to him. The night air was peaceful, but deep inside, Mildred still felt a quiet unease. She couldn't forget the look on those men's faces, the arrogance, the anger. She hoped they had moved on and forgotten her. A few days later, on a warm Saturday morning, she decided to visit the small farmers market downtown. It was something she hadn't done in a while. The thought of seeing familiar faces and buying fresh fruit lifted her spirits. She dressed neatly, put on her hat, and took Rex with her. The market was full of life. People talking, children laughing, music playing softly from a nearby stand. Mildred chatted with a few vendors she knew, buying apples, tomatoes, and a small loaf of bread. Rex walked calmly beside her, drawing smiles from several people. As they made their way home, Mildred felt better than she had in days. The air smelled of rain, and clouds were gathering in the distance. She smiled as she thought of having a quiet afternoon with a cup of tea and a slice of fresh bread. But as she turned down her street, her steps slowed. The same red truck was parked near the end of the block, just a few houses away. Her heart dropped. She froze for a moment, unsure what to do. Rex immediately noticed. His ears shot up and his body became still and ready. Mildred whispered softly, "It's all right, boy. Just stay close." She tried to act natural and continued walking toward her house. But as she got closer, one of the men stepped out from behind the truck. He was the same one who had shouted at her days ago. He looked at her and smirked. "Well, look who it is," he said. "The lady and her big dog." Mildred didn't respond. She kept walking, her eyes on her gate. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the man said louder, taking a step forward. His tone wasn't angry this time. It was mocking, almost playful, but not in a kind way. Rex growled softly, the sound low and deep, like a warning. The man stopped and held up his hands. "Easy there, old lady. No need to get all worked up." He laughed and turned back toward the truck, saying something to the others inside. Mildred didn't wait to hear it. She walked quickly through her gate and closed it behind her. Her hands trembled as she locked it. Rex stood on the porch, staring in the direction of the truck, every muscle tense. The truck drove off after a few minutes, but Mildred's calm was gone. She stood there for a while, staring at the empty street. "This has to stop," she whispered. That evening, she called the police again and explained what had happened. They assured her they would increase patrols in her area. "Please don't hesitate to call us if you feel unsafe," the officer said kindly. After hanging up, Mildred sat on her couch with Rex beside her. She stroked his fur slowly, trying to steady her thoughts. "You know, Rex," she said softly, "I never used to be afraid of walking outside. But lately, it feels different. It's like the world got meaner." Rex leaned his head against her knee as if telling her she wasn't alone. Later that night, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Mildred was about to go to bed when Rex suddenly lifted his head. His ears twitched and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" she whispered, her heart starting to race. Rex stood up and walked toward the door, sniffing. Mildred turned off the lamp and peeked through the curtain. At first she saw nothing. Then in the dim glow of the streetlight, she caught sight of movement near her front gate. Two figures stood there, whispering and looking around. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped back quietly, her mind racing. She didn't want a confrontation, but she also knew she couldn't just freeze. Rex looked up at her, ready for her signal. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. Her voice trembled as she explained that there were people outside her home. The operator told her to stay inside and that an officer was on the way. The figures at the gate moved closer, trying to see through the fence. Rex growled again, louder this time. One of them stepped back in surprise. "Stay back, Rex," Mildred whispered. She didn't want him to get hurt. But Rex didn't move far. He stood guard at the door, his body tense and still. A few minutes later, the sound of sirens approached in the distance. The figures quickly turned and ran toward the end of the street. The red truck roared to life and sped away. Mildred stood frozen for a long moment, clutching the phone. Rex stayed by the door, growling softly until the flashing lights appeared outside. The officer from earlier knocked gently. "It's all right now, ma'am. We got here as fast as we could. They're gone." Mildred nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly. The officer took a short report and promised to keep an eye on the area. Before leaving, he looked down at Rex again. "That dog of yours, and he's something special. Most dogs would bark like crazy, but him, he knows when to stand his ground." After the officers left, Mildred locked the door and sat down, feeling the exhaustion of the night settle over her. She looked at Rex, You didn't panic. You didn't bark too much. You just knew what to do. Something about the way he had moved, how he had stood in front of her with such confidence, stayed in her mind. It wasn't normal for a regular pet. There was precision in the way he reacted, a kind of discipline that only came from training. The next morning, she called the shelter where she had adopted him. A kind voice answered. "Hello," Mildred began. "I adopted a dog from you about 2 years ago, a German shepherd named Rex. I was wondering if you could tell me more about his background." The woman on the other end paused. "Oh yes, Rex, I remember him. He came to us after his handler passed away. He was a police K9, retired early because he needed a calm home after years of service." Mildred froze. "A police dog?" "Yes," the woman said warmly. "He was one of the best. We were so happy when you took him home. You were exactly the kind of person we hoped would adopt him, gentle and patient." After the call ended, Mildred sat quietly for a long time. She looked at Rex lying by the window, his head resting on his paws. "So that's who you are," she said softly. "You've been protecting people your whole life." Rex lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes calm and knowing. That day, Mildred felt both proud and emotional. She finally understood why Rex always seemed so aware, why he never panicked, why he always positioned himself between her and anything uncertain. He wasn't just a pet. He was a trained guardian. Later in the evening, she took him for a short walk around the block. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and pink. Neighbors waved as they passed, and for the first time in days, Mildred felt a small spark of peace. But even as she smiled and chatted with a few people, she couldn't shake the thought that those men might come back again. Only now she wasn't as afraid. Because she knew that the quiet, loyal dog walking beside her wasn't just any dog. He was a protector, ready to do what he was born to do. And though the next test would come sooner than she expected, that night Mildred finally went to bed with a little more courage in her heart, whispering as she turned off the light, "Thank you, Rex. You were meant to find me." Rex lay at the foot of her bed, eyes half closed but still watching, waiting, calm, steady, and ready for whatever might come next. The morning after Mildred learned the truth about Rex, she woke up with a strange mix of pride and worry. She couldn't stop thinking about what the woman at the shelter had told her, that Rex had once been a police K9. It explained everything. The calm focus, the quiet strength, the way he always seemed to know what to do before she even spoke. She sat on the edge of her bed, running her hand through his thick fur. "So that's who you are," she whispered softly. "You've seen things, haven't you? You've saved people before." Rex looked up at her, his tail giving a slow, steady wag. For the first time since those men appeared, Mildred felt a kind of comfort. She wasn't just an old woman with a dog anymore, she was someone protected by a trained guardian. The day was quiet. Mildred watered her plants, baked cornbread, and sat by the window to read her book. But every now and then she caught Rex staring toward the street, ears perked. It made her uneasy, though she tried not to show it. By late afternoon, the sky turned gray. A soft rain began to fall, tapping gently on the roof. Mildred stood on her porch watching the droplets glisten on the flowers. She had always loved rainy days. They made her feel peaceful, but that peace didn't last long. A car engine rumbled in the distance. At first it was faint, just another vehicle passing through. But when she looked up, her heart dropped. The red truck had returned. It slowed as it passed her house, its tires crunching on the wet pavement. She froze where she stood. The windows were rolled down halfway, and she could see 2 of the men inside. They didn't shout this time. They just stared, cold and wordless. Rex stepped forward, standing between her and the street. His body was still, but his fur bristled slightly. Mildred quickly went inside and locked the door. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but she stopped herself. The truck kept rolling, then disappeared around the corner. She tried to calm down, telling herself maybe it was just coincidence. Maybe they were passing through. But deep inside, she knew better. Later that evening, she received a call from the same kind neighbor who had warned her before. "Miss Johnson," he said, "I saw that truck again today near the park. They were just sitting there for a while. You should be careful." "Thank you for letting me know," she said softly. "I'll stay alert." After hanging up, she sat down with Rex. The rain had stopped, and the air outside had turned quiet and heavy. She could hear frogs croaking in the distance. "Looks like we'll have to be brave again, boy," she whispered. That night she went to bed early but couldn't sleep. Every little sound made her heart race. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see headlights. Rex lay near the front door, head resting on his paws but eyes open. It was almost as if he was waiting for something, listening, calculating. Around midnight, Mildred finally drifted into a light sleep. But Rex didn't move. He heard the faint sound of an engine far away, then the crunch of tires on gravel. He rose silently and walked to the window. The same red truck was parked a few houses down. He watched as two figures stepped out and started moving toward the yard. Rex let out a quiet, deep growl. Not loud, but enough to wake Mildred. She sat up, confused at first. "What is it, boy?" He looked at her, then toward the door. She followed his gaze and froze when she saw the shadow outside the window. Her heart started pounding. Without thinking, she reached for her phone and dialed the police again. "Please, they're outside my house again," she whispered, her voice trembling. The operator assured her that officers were on their way. "Stay inside, ma'am. Keep the doors locked." Rex stayed by the door, every muscle tense, waiting. The sound of the gate creaking open filled the air. Mildred felt fear rise inside her chest, but she remembered what the officer had said. Help was coming. She took a step back, clutching the phone, whispering softly, "Stay close, Rex." There was the sound of footsteps on the porch. Then silence. Rex's ears twitched. He stood perfectly still, ready. A soft knock came on the door, and not polite, but testing. "Who's there?" Mildred called out, her voice steady, though her hands shook. No answer. Before she could say anything else, Rex's body stiffened. One of the shadows outside shifted, and that was enough for him to act. He barked. One loud, powerful sound that made the air vibrate. The figures outside jumped back, startled. Then came the sound of running feet. Within seconds, flashing lights appeared at the end of the street. The police car stopped in front of the house, and two officers rushed out. The men didn't get far. The officers caught them near the truck. Mildred stood frozen, still gripping the phone, tears of relief forming in her eyes. One of the officers came to the door. "It's all right now, ma'am," he said gently. "We got them." Mildred slowly opened the door, Rex standing right beside her. The officer smiled at the sight of him. "That's one brave dog you've got," he said. "You can tell he's had training." The other officer walked over. "Funny thing," he said. "When we checked their truck, we found a few things that weren't too innocent. They've been causing trouble all over town." Mildred nodded slowly, still trying to steady her breathing. "Thank you, officers, truly." One of the officers looked down at Rex again and said, "I thought I recognized this dog. He used to be on our team a few years back." "Rex, right? K-9 Division. Worked with Officer Green." Mildred's eyes widened. "You knew him?" The officer smiled. "Of course. He was one of the best. Saved more than one life. We were sad when he had to retire after his handler passed away. It's good to see he found a home." Mildred felt tears fill her eyes again, but this time they weren't just from fear. They were from pride. She looked down at Rex and whispered, "You've been protecting people all your life, haven't you?" Rex wagged his tail slightly, his eyes calm but alert. The officers finished their report and promised to keep an eye on her property. As they left, Mildred stood by the doorway, holding Rex close. The night air felt lighter now. The storm had passed, both inside and out. The next morning, news about the incident spread quickly through the neighborhood. People stopped by to check on her, bringing food and kind words. Some had seen the flashing lights the night before and wanted to make sure she was all right. Mildred thanked each one, smiling softly. "I'm fine, thanks to Rex," she said every time. A few days later, a local news reporter came by. "Ma'am, we heard about what happened," she said politely. "We'd like to do a short story about your dog, the retired police K-9 who protected his owner." Mildred hesitated at first, not wanting attention, but the reporter promised it would be a simple, positive story, something to remind people about kindness and courage. When the story aired, people across town were moved. The headline read, "Retired police dog protects elderly woman from threat." The photo showed Mildred smiling gently beside Rex, her hand resting on his back. Neighbors she had never met stopped her on her walks to say kind things. "You've got a hero there," one man said. "He deserves a medal," Mildred laughed softly. He just wants his biscuits, she replied. The attention eventually quieted down, but life didn't go back to exactly how it was. The police started a small program in honor of Rex, encouraging people to adopt retired service dogs and give them peaceful homes. They even invited Mildred to a community event to share her story. Standing on the small stage, holding Rex's leash, Mildred spoke softly into the microphone. "I didn't know I was adopting a hero," she said, smiling through tears. "All I wanted was a friend. But sometimes life sends you someone who's both." The crowd clapped warmly. Some people wiped their eyes. Rex sat calmly at her feet, tail wagging slowly as if he understood every word. After the event, Mildred and Rex walked home under a sky filled with soft orange light. She felt lighter than she had in weeks. "You've done enough protecting, my boy," she said gently. "It's time you rest." Rex nudged her hand affectionately, his eyes full of quiet understanding. That evening they sat together on the porch as the sun set. The street was peaceful again, children playing, neighbors talking, laughter drifting through the air. The fear that once filled her heart was gone. Mildred looked down at Rex and smiled. "You were meant to find me," she whispered, "and I was meant to love you." Rex lay down beside her, resting his head against her foot, eyes half closed. For the first time in a long while, Mildred felt safe. Not because the police were watching, not because the trouble was over, but because of the loyal soul lying quietly beside her. In that small corner of the world, on a quiet street filled with the scent of evening flowers, an old woman and her brave dog sat together, two lives joined by fate, courage, and love.